Hello, and welcome to the Kids Teaching Kids podcast. In this podcast, we have high schoolers come on and answer questions that middle schoolers have about high school. Whether it be band, choir, orchestra, or just general high school life, we're going to cover it all, so make sure to stay tuned if you want to learn something new. With all that being said, today we're going to be talking about SAT and ACT. Today I'm also joined by Ansh Sharma. Ansh Sharma is a rising senior and aspiring computer science major who studied and got a 1590 on the SAT. He is also an accomplished tutor who has helped many students increase their score under the College Board name. So hi Ansh, how are you doing today?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you for being here. So we had a bunch of middle schoolers ask us questions about SAT and ACT, and we collected the most popular ones, and we're going to answer them here for you guys today. So, Ansh, we'll just start easy. What are the SAT and ACT tests, and what purpose do they serve?
So the SAT and ACT tests are standardized tests by College Board, and they're basically meant to test how ready you are for college. So the SAT has the reading and the writing sections where the scores go up to 800, and then the math section where the score also goes up to 800 for a total of 1600. And then the ACT test has 5 sections: English, math, reading, and science, with an optional writing section. And all of those are scored out of 36, and your score is the average of 5, or 4 if you don't take the writing section.
Yeah, so they have they're obviously very different scores, but online you'll be able to find comparison charts, sort of like what SAT or ACT score sort of lines up. So 36 would line up with essentially a 1600 because they're perfect scores. So like that going down the scale, you'll find a chart somewhere. Just search up SAT, ACT comparison scores and you'll see what I'm talking about. So when do kids usually take the SAT?
Most kids take the SAT in their junior year, near the end of the junior year in the second semester. But really, you can take it whenever you want because College Board offers tests throughout the year, and you can pay $60 or so to take a test in, I think it's like January, March, August. There are many test dates every year.
Yeah, so there's gonna be a free SAT date assigned in March, I believe, like early March by the school. And then every other test, if you want to take on the side, you have to pay, like Ansh said, I think it's $60. And so that you can do, they essentially have one literally every month. But what everyone tries to encourage is to finish it off before junior year ends. And the reason for that is because once senior year starts, you're going to be jam-packed working on essays and, building your resume more maybe. So that's like, once you get to that point, you're not going to have time to study properly for it.
Also, it's noteworthy that while there is like the free SAT for a lot of people, some schools don't host a free SAT, and you just have to go to a center and pay for it. Same thing for the ACT. Like, our school didn't have a free ACT, but some schools actually have free ACTs that you can take.
Okay, so yeah, I guess you'll just have to see how your school runs specifically. That's good now. How important is the SAT or ACT when applying to college? I'd say it sort of depends. I think it is important in the sense. So the way the SAT and ACT, to me, the structure of these tests, it's not to test your intelligence. I know that for a fact. It's not, the main purpose of it. It's almost like when it comes to any test you have in high school, a lot of the information you probably don't need to know, but it's essentially like, can you study properly and can you take a test and do well on it is the main purpose of it. So like,
are you ready for a college level course load?
Right. So if you're gonna, you have final exams in college, maybe even high school, depends. If you're college level courses, they need to know, can this kid, study for a test over the span of a few months and do well on it. Essentially, that's the goal. It's not, oh, I hope he's good at math or I hope he's good at science. That's not the point of the test. But I think it's less important if you're doing creative fields. So if you're going into art or film or something like that, then it's not going to matter as much just because they're more worried about can you tell a story? Are you a creative, unique individual? But for more technical fields like engineering or computer science, that's going to be a lot more important compared to some of the creative fields. How do you prepare for these tests and how long does it take? Ansh, I think you're better fit to answer this.
Okay, so it really depends on your prior knowledge because especially in the math section, there are some kids that don't even have to do any studying, and already from their prior studying and knowledge, they can already get an 800 on the test. They don't really have to try. And then there are other kids who don't have as much prior knowledge, and they have to like make sure to study up to whatever they want. So generally, if you're around like if you're around like a 500 or 600 out of 800, you it would probably take you a few months, like 3 or 4 or 5 months, to study up to like a 700 or a 750, if that's your goal. And if you're like 700, 750, it might take you like a few months because one thing that's really important is you could be studying like the same amount as someone else, but if you're not studying as smart as them, then you wouldn't be making as much progress. Like some people just take practice tests, like a bunch of practice tests, and their score remains pretty much the same because they're not really learning from their mistakes, they're just doing the questions. While that may work a little bit on math, if you already know all the concepts, on reading that's not really going to help because you don't know why you got the question wrong.
I think that's a really good point. There's a few ways people study in the sense there so you have different tools that you can use to help. So you have places like C2 or KD. So these are going to be SAT tutoring places. These ones are pretty pricey. C2 much more than KD. And essentially for these, they're going to have a tutor maybe having 3 kids in their class, and I'm not sure about Katie, but C2 has around 3 kids per class, and essentially they're gonna teach you on how that on the SAT. So that's if you need more personal coaching, then that might be a better fit for you. But for Ansh, he's really good at learning by himself, so he built himself up to a 1590 literally using Khan Academy. And so Khan Academy is also a really great tool. But if you're going to study online, you need to have the discipline to actually do it. If you're not the kind of person to do the work unless someone else makes you, then Khan Academy is not going to be the right tool. But if you're determined and you can do it at home, Khan Academy is absolutely wonderful and it's free. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind. You just have to understand how you study better. And like Ansh was saying, if you don't learn from your mistakes, you're kind of wasting your time. So when you miss questions, make sure to just go back and be like, why did I miss it? What's the correct answer? Why is the correct answer correct? Ask yourselves these questions. And a lot of the times they'll have explanations. So that way you try not to make the same mistakes again. Otherwise, you're not going to improve. So, Ansh, what is the difference between the SAT and ACT, and what would you recommend kids take?
So the SAT and ACT are slightly different in the skills that they test, I would say. So the SAT has 2 math sections, a reading section and a writing section. And then the ACT has 5 different sections. I think it was writing, math, reading, science, and like history.
Yeah.
So
history, not history.
But all the ones except for the math are pretty much just extra reading sections. So if you think you're more confident with more reading, then you should take the ACT. And if you're more confident in math, then you should take the SAT. But colleges don't really prefer one over the other. It really just depends on what you think you can do the best on. Like I have a friend, he got like a 14, 15 on the SAT, which is a great score, but he wasn't really satisfied with that. And he switched over to the ACT and he was able to get a much better score. He got a 35.
Wow. Yeah, it's so the test, like honestly, they're not too different in the sense most of a lot of the concepts are the same. I think the biggest thing about the biggest difference is that the ACT is much faster. than the SAT. They're both fast tests, but the ACT is faster and the questions will be slightly easier. So that's just how, like the pacing of it works. Obviously the scoring is different. If you don't know which one you want to do, I would recommend you take a practice one of both. You can find a free one online. I think College Board should have like 10 of each. Go online, take a free SAT and take a free ACT. Not in the same day, obviously. And compare your scores. Pull up that score comparison chart. If one is significantly higher than the other, or you prefer one more than the other, then obviously go with that one. If you got relatively the same score, but there's one that you liked better, do that one. But if you got the same score and you feel the same on them both, I would say start with the SAT and possibly switch over to ACT later. But it's much harder to switch over from ACT to SAT than it is the other way around. So if you don't know, I would say start with SAT.
And if you don't know what you want to do, it's not really like that you dug yourself into a hole by studying for the wrong one, because the skills are still pretty like transferable. Like if you studied for SAT math and you could get like a 1500, you're definitely not going to do bad on the ACT.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Are there any strategies or tips for doing well on the tests?
So I'm actually not a big fan of like the super long-winded, strange strategy. Like there are some people, they don't really like read the passage. What they do is they like skim over the questions and then they go back into the passage to what the question is referring to, and then they try to answer the question based on that. But what I like to do better is just read the passage, just read the whole passage, skim over it in like 2 or 3 minutes. If you can't really do that, I'd suggest you read a few books to like increase your reading speed and like your comprehension in general, and then after you've read the whole passage, you'd go and answer the question. You don't have to answer them in order. I personally do, but a lot of people find it easier if you start from the end where they ask more specific questions, and then you go back to the beginning where they ask more generalized questions about the whole passage.
So reading books is extremely helpful. If you haven't read books all this time and all of a sudden junior year you're gonna start reading books, you could try. I tried and I gave up because I hate books, and that's why I didn't do good on the test. But yeah, reading books is extremely helpful. There's a few books that suck, but they're really good for the test, like Pride and Prejudice, Inferno.
Like you want books that are more heavy in their wordage and prose.
Yes.
Like you want books that are like confusing. Like you read them and you don't really understand what you just read.
But then you want to figure out and understand it. Like Inferno.
Yeah.
Inferno was written, I think, it said some like 2,000 years ago. Inferno is old as hell. So reading books exactly like that don't use today's English, and you have to, for me, I read some of Inferno. Every single chapter, I would read it and then I would go to Spark Notes. What did I just read? And I start to get the hang of it a little bit. Okay, that makes a little sense. They're using weird words, but I'm still kind of getting it. So that's the main goal. If you want to Spark Notes it after, just to understand, then that's fine. The point is, just read it and then you sort of get used to the grammar. If you just read manga from like today, you're not gonna improve your comprehension as much, and that won't help. So read, also repetition. These tests are very much, can you do 500 practice questions, which is gonna suck and it's really boring, but that's the best way to do it. And then learning from your mistakes rather than just doing it and missing questions and keep going. Every time you miss a question, why did I miss it? Ask yourself those questions once again. And that way you'll see and stop making the same mistakes over and over again.
Reading older books also really helps because not all the passages on the SAT are recent. Like sometimes they'll give like a passage from the 1700s and you'll have to like navigate through that prose, and it'll be a lot easier if you've already read material that's using similar language.
Yeah. It'll suck, but it's worth it if you want the score. So Can you use your SAT and ACT scores to apply to colleges outside of the United States?
Yes, there are a lot of colleges who that like accept SAT and ACT scores outside the US. There are some that don't, but it's good to take anyways. Like you can take it no matter what, and then if you do bad on it, you don't have to send it.
Yeah.
And then there are also some colleges not outside of the US, but inside the US there are colleges that like have require your score, so you pretty much have to take it at that point.
Yeah, I would not suggest to anyone that you don't take the test. Even if you don't want to, even if you don't study, just take the test at least once. That way you have a score and you're not, that way if you're applying to test required schools, then you're not restricted. You can still apply to those schools if you want. So and then that the SAT policy changes like every year. Every single year the colleges are like, "Oh, we take it this year. Oh, now we don't." So like you don't know. That's why I say just take it once. Even if you don't study, just go sit. It's like 4 hours. Just go take it, and then that way you have something to send to colleges. So what happens if you don't do well on the test? I think that we were sort of covering that. It's not the end of the world, but you know it'll give you it won't be helpful. It will put you down a little bit depending on where you're applying.
Like there's actually a common rule. You should look up the common data set of the college that you're applying to, and if your score is above the 25th percentile, then you should send it. And if it's above the 75th percentile, then it'll really help you. Like it'll be a really positive thing that colleges look at and see that like, oh, this is something that puts him above the rest instead of something that just satisfies the minimum.
Yeah, it's even if it gives like a small advantage, it doesn't have to be huge. You don't have to get a 1600. But if the average score for the college is, let's say, a 1300, I don't know, and you get a 1350, then that's like, okay, this kid is slightly better than a lot of the kids that apply here. It just gives them a good impression in their mind. Because when they look at your application, they just start looking at the numbers. What's his GPA? What's his SAT score? These are the things they're looking at first. So this is almost like the first impression, right? So if you're above what they usually see on the scores, then that's going to be good. But if you're below, I would say you probably don't need to send it because it just won't add anything. So there's no point.
Well, the common data set is not really about who's applying. The common data set is the data of the students that are accepted into the
Yeah,
college. So even if you're above, as long as you're not below 25%, you should send it because otherwise they might think that,
you
oh,
did
your
that.
score if you're not sending it, then it must be like even lower. They would probably assume that it's lower than what it really is if you're
Hmm.
sending something that's above the 25th percentile.
Yeah. So that's you just have to be careful. Look at the data sets for each of your colleges and just write it down on a Google sheet. That way you can compare. But you
Like I understand, like if you look at colleges like UTD, I think the 25th percentile is something like 1200, and then the 75th percentile is like 1400. But then if you look at like MIT, the average is like above 1500.
yeah. It really depends on the college you're applying to. Obviously, the more prestigious the university, the higher the scores, just because there's more kids applying there. But yeah, just research each college beforehand. That way you know and you can just compare for all of the colleges. Are there any resources or study materials that you recommend?
So, of course, there's Khan Academy, which I use myself, and I think I have around over 1,000, almost 2,000 questions answered on it. And it's the greatest, I think, the greatest free resource to use for SAT. Like, you don't have to pay anything. There's also like KD and C2, which can help you, but the main thing that they give is just a lot of practice tests. But you don't really need that many practice tests. The 10 official practice tests that are online that College Board like officially releases are all on Khan Academy, and they're they're the most accurate tests, and you don't need more than 10. Like you shouldn't use practice tests as like something to study. You should use it as something to measure your progress. So you should maybe take one once you haven't taken any prep to see what your baseline is, and then see what skills you're lacking in and try to focus on those skills, and then like maybe a couple months later take another practice test. Not like what I see some people doing, and it works for some people, but it's not really optimal if they just like do one practice test like every day and then just take like seven practice tests a week, and like they're like cramming or something. It doesn't work very well.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't cram until the last minute. I think C2 and KD also use the College Board test, but it's basically the reason. I'll tell you why. The reason people pay for C2 and KD. It's not for the study material, because the study material is free online. It's different, but essentially the purpose of these places is, you have a live tutor, and then you can also, you can ask questions or whatever, and there's also someone to sort of keep you on track. If you're zoning out, your teacher will be like, hey, back to the book, you know. So that, but online Khan Academy, you could just zone out for 2 hours and no one's gonna be like, hey, get back to work. So that's essentially why you're paying. Do not be under the assumption that you're paying for these tutoring places for better study material or something like that, because they means the study material is essentially the same, and clearly it doesn't work. I got a 1350 from C2. Ansh got a 1590 from Khan Academy. So it really just depends on how you learn. If you need a teacher, then that's different. Then that's when you pay. But if not, then it's really not necessary. Um. Okay. Can you take the SAT online?
So previously my answer would have been no, but starting 2024, College Board is actually moving the whole test online and changing the format a bit. So it's by the time that the current middle schoolers are going to be taking the tests, they're going to be all online, and you won't even be able to take it on paper. So yeah, you definitely can take it online, and people are kind of wondering, will that change the difficulty, because they're also changing how the test is. It's not like there's a set amount of questions and everyone answers those same questions. It's more like you take one set, and then based on the score that you get on that set, like let's say you get a perfect score on that set, then they give you like a harder set to test your score. Or if you get a lot of them wrong, they give you like an easier set. So it's really about like the test is adaptable. I think that's the word that they're using. And they said that they're still going to reflect the same scores. So if you would have gotten like a 1400 on the old like SAT that's currently being used, then you'll still get the same 1400 on the digital SAT. And they do that by pretty much using the curve. So there's like a curve for writing and reading. Based on the difficulty of the test, they pretty much change the score that you get for how many wrong questions you have.
Yes.
So in math, the curve is generally a lot rougher. So like if you have like a question wrong in math, it's generally like minus 10 points even if you get one wrong. But in reading, if you get like one or two wrong, sometimes you can still get off with like a perfect score in reading. And like especially down the line, you can tell more of a difference. Like if you get 10 questions wrong in math, that's maybe like a 700. If you get 10 questions wrong in reading, that could be like a 750. It really is a lot more lax.
I think so. You will be able to take it online, but just not in the way that you think or originally expected. So, what are some common mistakes to avoid during the test?
I think it's agonizing too much on one question. So like if you like spend too much time on one question, even if you finally answer it after like 3 minutes, you've pretty much wasted like enough time to go answer a bunch of other questions. If you're like really advanced and you think that you can like and you want to get every single question and you think that you can definitely get all the questions within the time limit, that's fine. But even if you get all the questions, you might have been rushing a lot more than if you just gave up on that question or like marked it for revision later, put like some answer like C or something, and then moved on.
Yeah, honestly, it's really just time. It's a time test. How fast can you answer the most questions accurately? That's pretty much the goal. It's not some super
Yeah,
complicated thing.
there's like um I think on the reading section there's 55 minutes and there's 50 no there's 65 minutes and 52 questions and there's those are split. Those 52 questions are split into five passages with 10 to 11 questions each.
Hmm.
So my strategy is I read the passage for like 2 to 3 minutes, and then I try to answer like one question per minute to get to like 12 to 13 minutes, or maybe a little bit less if the passage is easier per passage.
Yeah, on pretty much all of the sections, your average is going to be about a minute per question. Reading it's a little higher, writing it's a little lower. I'm not entirely sure about math, but essentially try and like allot 1 minute to one question, and that's gonna be your main goal. But if you can go faster than that, then that's like amazing because then you can come back and be like, I skipped this question. Let me go back to it and actually go through it.
Especially on math, you can get through the questions a lot faster than the time that they give you. Like, I think there's 35 questions, 25. There's like not that many questions, and like you get almost 1.5 minutes per questions on one of the sections, calculator, non-calculator. A lot of people find themselves with like 10, 15 minutes left in the section. Don't rush yourself to try to get that because it's better to like have everything answered solidly than to have everything answered rushed and then try to revise it. But if you can like even solidly answering every question, if you can have a bunch of time left to revise and make sure that you didn't make like one or two little mistakes, especially on math, because one or two little mistakes will definitely cost you, then that's great.
Yeah. How soon should people start preparing for these tests? I
I
feel,
think I don't think there's ever a time that's too early to be preparing for them, but I don't think it's really necessary to prepare for them before ninth or 10th grade, before like you get into college. I don't think there's much point. Like I took like the Duke Tip. It's a program where you take the SAT in like seventh grade. I got like under 1200, I think, but like I also didn't know much of the reading, writing, or mostly the math concepts. I may have like known them in theory. I just wasn't really good enough. I had a solid foundation in math enough to get a high enough score. I think I got like a 590 in both sections and like a 1200 in the whole thing.
yeah. I would say start reading books as early as you can, but about like actual SAT studying, probably like 10th or maybe 11th grade, depending on how fast you learn. On average, it'll take like few months up to a year to study for the test. So it depends on how fast of a study you are, how pick.
It also depends on what your baseline is because I see a lot. There's a lot of people, like a lot of people, they just take it for the first time. They haven't really studied for it. They get like a 1400, which is I
Yeah.
think a top 5% score,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a much different set of things to study than someone who takes it for the first time and gets like a 900.
Yeah, that's true. It so that's take a practice test early, and then you sort of see what you need to fix, and then that way you can focus on that. I think that's a good point. We have one final question, and it's pretty simple. What is the best piece of advice you can give to someone preparing to take the SAT or ACT?
I think study with time limits.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, study with time limits and review your questions. So like when I would be studying for the SAT, like a math section, right? I would give myself 30 questions and 30 minutes. So I'd try to answer like one question per minute. And when I kept on doing it and practicing, I pretty much got to the point where like it was hard for me to not do a question in a minute. And then for reading, especially this one's more important. For reading, you have to make sure that you're getting the time right because that's the section where people mess up on time the most. Like even even when I got my first score, like the reading, I like kind of rushed on the reading section and didn't get as well as I wanted to. So really review your questions to make sure that you're actually reading or that you're actually learning, and then make time limits to make sure you don't mess up on the test because the pressure is definitely different.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to leave off. Thank you so much for being here, Ansh. I appreciate it. That's all we have today for the Kids Teaching Kids podcast. I hope you did learn something new. Make sure to tune in next Thursday for our next week's episode and have a wonderful day.